Is there anything more frustrating than having your subject right in front of you, but your camera just can't seem to focus? You've spent a fortune on gear, but somehow it keeps letting you down. Super annoying, and trust me, I've been there many times as well. But it's actually not just your camera's fault. Even the best gear can only perform if we follow a few simple steps. So let me show you in this video what we need to do to get razor sharp and in focus images, whether it's of a small bird in the bush or wild mid-air action. And I will also share with you the most important skill to master as a photographer, which is the main reason why so many people always just seem to miss the best moment. I'm Jan Wegener, and for over 20 years I've been a professional photographer capturing unique bird photos and videos and teaching all of you to create your own masterpieces. While it's important to set up your camera correctly, and I've linked my setup guides for you down in the description that will help you to set up your camera to perfection, dialing in the right settings is just the foundation, because we also need to deploy crucial techniques in the field that help our cameras to succeed. The first step whenever I get a new camera is to set up back button focus, and in particular double back button autofocus. One button for the spot autofocus that allows me to focus on whatever I want, similar to DSLR autofocus, and the second button I assign to whole area autofocus or wide or auto area IF, where the camera finds the subject for me and then tracks it all over the viewfinder. The reason to use back button focus rather than shutter button focus is that we can separate focus tracking from image taking, and that is crucially important, especially for birds in flight and action photography. It allows us to focus and track our subject whenever we want, and when we press the shutter button, the camera won't suddenly focus on something else like the background. With this technique, we can be always ready to shoot. We simply half press the shutter button and keep our finger on there, which will also engage pre-capture if you have that on your camera, but we're not focusing at the same time and only use the back button to focus whenever our subject is in a good spot. And this is very different to shutter button focus, where we would have to focus all the time when we half press the shutter button, which can be quite detrimental, as you will see later on in this video. Sometimes, no matter what we try, even the spot autofocus will fail and simply not lock on to our target and just go elsewhere. And in those situations, I always recommend that we turn on full-time manual focus. On many cameras, this is not turned on by default, but I highly recommend to turn it on, which then allows you to always manually interfere with the autofocusing no matter what you do. So you're focusing, your camera jumps onto something else, you can quickly grab the manual focus ring and bring your focus back onto your target. And especially in tricky situations like where you're photographing a subject in the grass, this can be very helpful because the autofocus will often jump onto the grass, can't find your subject, but you can quickly bring it back with the manual focus onto target, and once the subject is basically back in focus, your autofocus will usually work again as well. The most underrated way to help our cameras in the field to acquire our target quicker is pre-focusing. If your subject is completely out of focus when you're trying to lock onto it, it's very difficult for the camera to find it and it will take a long time and it may miss it completely. So our job as photographers is to have our subject as much in focus as possible whenever we lift our cameras to our eyes and start focusing. This will not only cut down the time it will take your camera to acquire a target, but it will also be much more reliable. So how do we actually pre-focus and make it work to our advantage? It's super simple. All we need to do is envision in what distance our subject will likely show up in relation to us and our camera. And then we just pre-focus on something that's in the similar distance to where we expect our subject to show up. It could be a tree, a rock, the water, or the perch a bird might show up. And once we do the pre-focusing, we can put the camera down, and if our subject now shows up, we quickly lift our camera back to our face, and because we pre-focus, the subject will likely be already almost in focus, and we press the button and our camera will lock right onto it. In this little turn example, I used the spot autofocus to always pre-focus on the tree trunk on the ground because it was in a similar distance to where I wanted to photograph the birds. And when one of the turns started to fly past, I just ripped my camera up, found the turn in the viewfinder, and because it was pre-focused, I could instantly start tracking it and got some lovely photos. Another important tip when it comes to autofocusing and pre-focusing is that your camera is much better at focusing forwards than jumping back onto your target. So when we pre-focus, for instance, it's advisable that you slightly focus in front of the distance where you think your subject will show up. So when it shows up, your camera can jump right onto it. You will have noticed in the field that if you're past your subject and your camera is stuck on the background, for instance, it's very hard to bring it back onto target because the camera then has to jump from a further distance where it's focused on something else back onto our target. A scenario like this where the camera is stuck in the distance is also the reason that I activate the full manual and also have the single point or spot autofocus activated with one of my back buttons. Because then we can easily either use the manual focus to bring the focus back onto our subject or use the single point autofocus to focus on something that has a lot of contrast right next to our subject, like a branch or a tree for instance, allowing us to bring the focus off the background and back to our target. Taking great raw files in the field is step one. But step two, that's equally important, is to learn a good editing workflow that allows you to edit all those raw images and make them shine. And this is why I developed my Lightroom and Next Generation Photoshop masterclasses. In my classes, I teach you step by step and in easy to follow chapters all the important tools and techniques you need to know to be able to get great results from even your most difficult to edit raw files. But of course, you won't just be watching, because I'm also providing you with my own raw files so you can edit right alongside me. And if you're not sure if my classes are worth it or the right fit for you, check out some of the amazing reviews that I receive on a daily basis from many happy students who I've helped to transform their editing lives, who now get great results with ease and actually enjoy editing their photos. So if you want to learn an easy to follow workflow that you can apply to all your raw files and get great results every single time, make sure to check out my masterclasses down there in the description. I know that will help you a lot. One mistake I see many photographers make is that they focus for too long. The longer you lock onto your subject, the greater the chances are that your camera will just suddenly jump onto something else. My method in the field is to focus in short bursts, maybe 4, 5, 6 seconds max, and then I let go and instantly refocus, and I do that over and over again. And that gives me the most accurate and tuned in autofocus. For instance, when I see a bird in the distance flying towards me that I want to photograph, I don't just start focusing on it and keep focusing on it the whole time, because chances are eventually, usually in the best moment, the camera will jump off my target. So what I do instead is I just focus on the bird, let go, let it fly towards me, focus again, let go, let it fly towards me, and refocus. And I do that until it's in the sweet spot where I want to take my photos, and then I press the shutter button, keep focusing, and take my images. Things get even harder if you're trying to capture birds in flight with pre-capture, because the initial thought would always be to simply engage pre-capture, focus on the subject, and then simply wait until it takes off and fire away. But that can actually lead to frustrations, because oftentimes, just in the moment when the birds take off, the camera will suddenly get stuck to the perch or focus on something else. To avoid frustrations here, I also only use short bursts of focusing, maybe a little bit longer than in other scenarios, maybe 5 to 10 seconds, and then I quickly restart it, making sure that the camera doesn't get confused and I lose track of my target just when it matters the most. Here's an example of a peregrine falcon that I tracked way too long because I was testing out the R1, but I got lucky in the end, because even though the background changed a lot, the camera stuck to the bird, and when it did the nice mid-air banking pose, I was actually able to nail the shot. Recently I found a pair of spangled drongos hunting for small insects mid-air. They were performing amazing flight maneuvers, but my camera actually had a very hard time locking onto them because the birds were so dark and the backgrounds were quite busy in most places. So I watched their behavior and tried to figure out the pattern, and there seemed to be one spot where they constantly were kind of flying past. So I pre-focused on the ground very close to that spot and then waited, and when the bird flew past again, I ripped up my camera, found the bird in the viewfinder and started focusing. With this method, I obviously still missed a lot of shots, but pre-focusing and then just only focusing on the bird with the autofocus in the last second actually allowed me to get some really nice images. This image is also a great example that the more you study your subject in the field and identify patterns or behaviors, the more successful you and your camera will be, because eventually you will be able to anticipate your subject's behavior and be ready exactly when it happens and nail the shot. The biggest challenge most photographers face in the field is that it actually takes them too long to find the subjects in their viewfinder. A great bird flies past, makes a nice pose, or for instance a cockatoo lands right in front of them, raises the crest, but by the time they find the bird in the viewfinder, all the good action has already happened. Being able to find your subject basically instantly in the viewfinder is a critical skill that every photographer needs to master in order to get fantastic images. Take the spangled drongo photo for example. If it had taken me only a split second longer to find the bird, I would have never gotten the photo. Most people call this skill hand-eye coordination, and the idea is that you practice this until you're able to lift your camera in front of your eyes and always have your subject right in your viewfinder without having to search for it. Now this takes a little bit of practice, but this is definitely something you can do. For instance, if you're sitting in a hide waiting for your subject, just pick a certain point in the distance and then try to point your camera right at it without looking through the viewfinder. And you practice this to the point until you're able to just lift your camera in front of your face and always have your subject right in that viewfinder. One good helper here can be to stare at the subject that you want to get in your viewfinder, track it with your eyes, and then basically just lift your camera right in line with where you are looking at. That will help you to find your target much quicker. What we definitely want to avoid is to start looking through the viewfinder too early and then just start searching around while looking through the viewfinder. Especially with longer lenses, it will be almost impossible to find the subject quick enough. If you're using zoom lenses, you can also zoom out a little bit because that makes it much easier to find the target. And once you found the target, quickly zoom back onto it and then take your images. That definitely helps in acquiring your targets quicker. When I'm photographing the endangered glossy black cockatoos coming in for a drink at sunset, I usually only have 1 to 2 seconds from the birds leaving the tree to landing. And the biggest issue is that I can't focus on the birds in the tree because the first meters of the birds flying are just so busy in terms of the background, and the birds are so dark that the camera almost always loses the focus onto the background. So what I have to do in this scenario is to pre-focus on the ground in a similar distance where I think the birds will make a nice landing pose, and then wait for the birds to take off. So I'm sitting there looking at the birds. The moment the birds start to take off, I rip up my camera, I track the bird while it's still being out of focus in my viewfinder until it comes close to my pre-focused area. I press the focus button, I focus and fire away and hopefully get some shots. Now this is definitely a difficult technique, but if you try that over and over, you will be able to get some pretty amazing photos that you would otherwise completely miss. And lastly, this should be a given, but good exposure in the field is not only important for the editing process and in getting good RAW files, but it also helps your camera to get better autofocus. If you're severely under or overexposing, it's much harder for your camera to find and track your subjects. And that brings us to the end of today's video. I hope these tricks and techniques will help you to get razor sharp and in focus results every time you go out. If you want to know how to set up your own cameras to perfection, check out my setup guides for you down there in the description. I have them for many different camera models, Canon, Nikon, Sony. Of course, I would also like to hear from you guys in the comments. What have been your biggest challenges when it comes to autofocus, and have you been able to overcome them? I'd also love to see a thumbs up for the video, check out my channel membership and masterclasses, and of course, hit that subscribe button so we can grow our community, and I'll see you in another video very soon. Bye!